Welcome back to another exciting episode of LPA Presents. I'm Matthew D. Rhodes, and today we have a truly special guest joining us. If you're a fan of engaging stories and insightful conversations, you're in for a treat. Our guest today is none other than Michael. I'm sorry, how do you pronounce that name?
That's okay, Matthew. It's Buonocore.
Buonocore? A remarkable screenwriter and the creative mind behind the hit podcast, The First Michael. Michael's unique storytelling and deep dives into the world of entertainment have captivated audiences around the globe. In today's episode, we'll be exploring Michael's journey as a screenwriter, his creative process, and the fascinating world of his podcast. We'll uncover the secrets behind his storytelling magic, discuss the challenges he's faced, and get an inside look at what it takes to thrive in the entertainment industry. So sit back, relax, and get ready for an inspiring and entertaining conversation with Michael. Let's dive into the world of screenwriting and storytelling on this episode of LPA Presents. So how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I was doing great before this interview, and now I'm doing even better after that very generous and kind introduction. Thank you so much for that.
What initially sparked your interest in screenwriting, and how did you get started in the industry?
Well, you mentioned my podcast, The First Michael, in the introduction. So I'll tell you a little bit about that because that led me to screenwriting. So the idea behind the First Michael podcast was to bring the audience along on the journey to find my biological father. And when we started the podcast and started the journey, I didn't know how it was going to turn out. And it turned out in very sort of surprising, unexpected ways that lent very well to storytelling. And also just, more importantly than the podcast, it was a, pretty amazing personal experience for me. So through the experience that I had creating the podcast and finding my biological father, I sort of found myself feeling like I had just lived through the story of a movie and that it should be a movie. And so I decided that I was going to write the screenplay for it. And I love writing. I didn't have a lot of experience with screenwriting. And so I sort of dove in and studied the craft and, learned as I went and made a bunch of mistakes. Mm-hmm. But ultimately wrote a screenplay that became, I guess it was a little bit of a gateway drug into screenwriting for me. And I just fell in love with that as an art form. And the screenplay itself, I haven't sold it or had it produced yet, but it has won some significant awards. And, I think kind of like all of us who are emerging screenwriters, I just keep hustling and, trying to find a home for it. But it's been a really great adventure and a great entree into learning screenwriting.
Have you thought of going beyond screenwriting, maybe directing, trying to get your own crew together?
Yeah, I would love to do that. I actually recently wrote a short script. Mm-hmm. I've written a couple, but this one that I wrote is something that could be done on a very small budget, which is, I think, conventional wisdom is sort of like if you're going to try to break in with a short script and direct it yourself, writing a story that doesn't have a ton of actors and doesn't have a ton of set pieces is kind of the way to go. So so I've done that, and my next step is to figure out how I might bring it to life. So I'm going to try.
With a lot of my work, screenwriting is not easy, especially when coming from being a novelist. Mm-hmm. One of my passions is to try and take my first book and turn it into a TV series.
Nice.
Which I'm close to getting there. It's just getting the finances, that's the biggest thing. But the indie market is actually starting to take off a lot more than these bigger ones. And that's something that, people should look into.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, yeah, I think a lot of the ways that people break in from outside is by having something that they've actually produced and created themselves as kind of a calling card, and that can lead to other things depending on whether your interest is in screenwriting or in directing or kind of doing all of that. So yeah, if this feels like a good moment, push forward and make it happen.
Can you walk us through your typical process when developing a new screenplay from idea to final draft?
Sure. There's a way of describing writing that I've heard some people use, which is being a pantser or being a plotter.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm a pantser. So I continue to try to build some discipline around being more of a plotter or someone who kind of maps out the story they want to tell from beginning to end and hits certain beats. But the sort of the intuitive way that I do it tends to be I have an idea for a story and I start on sentence one and I just keep pushing through until I find my way to the end. And I think that I think there are valuable things about either way, but I think it's also helpful to be able to kind of swim in either pool, right? Sometimes you get stuck one way or the other, and if you understand how to either, sort of the process of mapping things out through outlining or whatever, that can help you get unstuck. But also sometimes when you're being, I think, maybe more analytical or process driven, you get in the way of your own creativity. And that's where being a pantser can just, give yourself permission to write what feels inspiring in the moment.
There is a third option there. I don't know if you knew about it, but it's the plantser. The plantser.
Yeah. Yeah.
I happen to be one of those. I will set a timeline of events of goals that I want to hit, and I don't always follow it, but at least it's there in case I get off track.
I love that. Yeah.
What do you find most challenging about the screenwriting process, and how do you overcome those challenges?
Mm. I think I think what's hard for me and I think is probably universally hard is just the idea that you're kind of putting your heart out on the page in whatever
Hmm.
way is meaningful to you. And if you want to be uh, a successful screenwriter, you have to um, accept the idea that you're going to, write and rewrite over and over again, and you're going to have to incorporate other people's ideas about what your screenplay can be. And, there's just sort of no way around the idea that, you know, the best case scenario, I think, is, someone loves your script and, um, it finds a home to become produced. And then there's just a process of like ripping it up and starting over and over again until it
Hmm.
becomes translated into a movie. And so I think it's hard. It's hard to learn how to accept the idea that the thing that you've put on the page that you love so much might get you in the door, but then you're going to have to just keep going. Yeah, and accept that you're just in this constant state of asking other people what they think about your creative expression and staying open to that.
Right. I mean, we've shared screenplays with each other, but like you said, my work would pretty much bring in a lot of people to watch it. The problem is producers would not see it the same way
Mm.
because they want what sells. And if I
Hmm.
were to do it myself, I can guarantee that I could get people to come in. But the producers will look at it and say, people wouldn't want to watch this. And that's not
Hmm.
true. Are there any specific rituals or habits you follow to get into the right mindset for writing?
I am definitely, I don't write only in the morning, but morning is sort of the time where I can kind of set myself up for the day. And like the ideal way to start a writing day is to, get up at my own pace and have some coffee and just sort of sit and, wade into writing. And if I start the day, uh, getting into a rhythm, that tends to carry through for the rest of the day. Um, but beyond that, I think it's just, I think it's a mix of, for me, inspiration and discipline. There are times where I'm so motivated and inspired to write that I can't stop typing. And then there are other times where I tell myself, just write the next thing. And if it sucks, but just push through. And then there are other times where, I think we have to give ourselves permission to just step away and give ourselves a
Hmm.
break.
I mean, even with my latest project, I've had to take a break. But one of the things I find is when I'm streaming, I'll get more work done than if I'm not streaming it, which is weird.
Okay.
I run a Twitch channel in which people can watch
Yeah.
me while I'm working and ask questions. If I can't answer a question, I need to rethink what I'm doing and go back and change some things.
Mm, that's very cool. Yeah, I love that.
How do you approach character development in your screenplays, and do you have any memorable characters you've created?
Ooh, I love that question. Character is super important to me. And I think one of the ways that I develop characters is by letting myself write scenes that are too long.
Hmm.
Because in doing that, I just sort of discover who the characters are. And I think I've learned a lot from the writing community that it's a common experience that when you've kind of figured out your characters enough, sometimes your characters are the ones that are telling you how the story needs to go and they
Yeah.
sort of take over. So I think, yeah, just giving myself permission to um, explore characters and conversations until it feels like the characters kind of come alive a little bit and take over the story in a certain way.
But have you ever had to write a character that was exploring themselves?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that first screenplay, the first Michael, that was based on the podcast, the first Michael, is about sort of exploring myself, and so
Hmm.
that character, I mean, in the screenplay, it's a fictionalized version of myself, but it's definitely someone who's trying to figure out um, what it means to be a full-grown adult who is trying to find their biological father, and you know whether that character does or doesn't, the fact that they decide to look for that person means they have to change who they are, right? Like you can't sort of stay stuck if you're going to push yourself to be that vulnerable. And so I had to experience it myself as a human being, and then I had to figure out how to bring it to life as a character that was me, but also not me. So that's the arc that character takes, which is sort of you know pursuing the idea of finding uh, their biological father for the sake of a podcast, with the idea that it's sort of like they're detached from it. It's just a means to create
Hmm.
art, right? The art being the podcast. But then, of course, it becomes very personal and very vulnerable for me and that character.
I have to admit, sometimes trying to write characters, even no matter what you do, it's like you can't always get what you want. I created a sci-fi where I was trying to tell the story of one particular character, but he became more of what's that when you need an object in a movie um, in order to progress the plot? You know what I'm talking about, right?
I think I do, but I'm so sorry I'm not helping. I don't remember the
Oh,
word that you're searching for.
I I can never remember it. But the main character that I was trying to get the backstory for, he's being sought after by everybody else in the story, and he's like not even given enough time to think about what he himself is, considering he has no memory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, that makes me think of the idea that you have to create characters who have agency and who sort of like push the story forward, even
Hmm.
if they're in some ways being swept along by their circumstances. And so it
Right.
sounds like that could be a tricky balance for the story that you're trying to tell.
Yeah. What's your take on the age-old debate, plot-driven versus character-driven storytelling?
Mm. I mean, I think I would say, you can find great examples of both. And so I think that it's most important, as a screenwriter to tell a story in an important way, or sorry, in a meaningful way. And so, sometimes that is very centered in character. And,
Hmm.
maybe it kind of depends on genre too. I mean, sometimes maybe in like a thriller or a horror, uh, it's propelled more by the story, and you want characters that you're attached to and you care about, but it's not a character study, right? It's about this, whether it's a serial killer that someone's trying to survive, or international espionage or whatever, that is very propulsive, where a character is trying to navigate that, versus something that's maybe drama or rom-com that's very rooted in sort of the characters and their personal development. So I think it sounds like a dodge, I know, but I think it's both, and it kind of depends on the story you're trying to tell.
Yeah, I just remembered what that word was, the MacGuffin.
Ah, the MacGuffin, yes. Yeah.
Uh, it's kind of hard to truly focus on a character versus plot when you're sitting down and writing, because you're wanting to settle on a plot, but then trying to add the character into the plot, or writing the character and then adding the plot afterwards. It's kind of hard to balance, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, depending on the story that I'm trying to tell, it can be hard, because sometimes you're inspired by one or the other, and you have to figure out how the other part balances it out, because
Mm-hmm.
you can't lean too heavily in one direction or the other, right? You've got this amazing idea for a story, and you know the plot may be interesting, but if we don't care about
The
the
characters.
characters that inhabit it, then no one's going to watch.
How do you deal with writer's block, and do you have any unconventional methods to overcome it?
Mm. Well, I did mention earlier, sometimes I will tell myself, just write the next thing. I mean, we have the luxury of technology where, like, you can make a copy of your script and just, completely screw it up.
Hmm.
And there's no danger in that, right? So if I'm feeling stuck, I can just make myself a copy and give myself permission to, completely rummage around in it. And if whatever I do sucks, then, I just delete it. There's no real risk there. So
Right.
Sometimes I think you just have to kind of push through and force yourself to write the next sentence or something. And usually for me, if I do that, you know, I might not get completely inspired and unstuck, but like I can keep moving, and maybe the next time I sit down, then the inspiration will come back.
I think just vegging out in a video game, story driven, doesn't matter. Just let your mind wander through what's
Yeah.
going on.
Yes.
A lot of my writer's blocks is I've come to a decision of whether something should be or not, and I'm thinking, why not write both and see what happens?
Yeah. I love that.
Go to different directions.
Mm-hmm.
What role does research play in your writing process, especially for scripts set in specific time periods or locations?
Um, yeah. I tend to write contemporary stuff, but I have
Hmm.
written period pieces for sure. Um, and a lot of stuff that I've written that is not contemporary is, sort of rooted in time periods that I've lived through. So my research is more kind of fact checking. Like if I
Hmm.
remember what was actually going on in 1983 or whatever. Um, but yeah, the internet is, certainly a big part of it. I'm not someone who tends to um, I'm not a history buff, so
Hmm.
I don't tend, that's not, doesn't tend to be the root of my storytelling. But yeah, internet searches, and then, just sort of qualitative interviews with people who have, lived through certain times.
The problem I see with a lot of so-called contemporary pieces anymore is they're still adding in certain technologies that don't exist yet.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're close to having them, but we're not ready for them yet.
Yeah, yeah. Well, among the genres that I have not dabbled in and probably won't, sci-fi is one of them. So I tend to stick very much to things that are familiar to me. Yeah.
Yeah. People ask me, do you write sci-fi or fantasy? And I do write both. But what about putting them together?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I'll let everyone know more about that at the end of the podcast.
Great.
Can you share any memorable moments or experiences from your journey as a screenwriter?
Yeah. One that definitely stands out is that I was nominated for the screenwriting award at the Sun Valley Film Festival, and I traveled there, and it's not Sundance, but it is a film festival that, Hollywood shows up for.
Hmm.
Um, and I was in the room when they announced the winner for the screenwriting award, and it was me. So I got the opportunity to sort of have that, sort of like the envelope opens and they announce your name. And I was introduced to someone who won the Academy Award for a short animated film, and just sort of had this tiny little glimpse into, you know, what the Hollywood life could be like. And then it was over very quickly, but it was very, yeah, it was a really fun experience. And then my name showed up in Variety, and that was exciting. So, yeah.
Were you able to make any movie deals off of that?
I was not. Nope.
Really?
No, I mean, not
Mate,
yet. It wasn't that long ago that it happened, so I'm still working on it. But
not even an agency?
you're killing me, Matthew. No. But I will also say that happened very shortly before the Writers Guild strike happened. So things got really quiet, and I also, in my income earning professional life, got very busy. So
yeah,
I'm sort of back in the hustle now after a bit of a break. But it was also a good insight into, a lot of times you can get attached to the idea that a certain thing is going to be the thing that breaks you in,
right.
At any given time, a thing might be the thing that helps you break in, but oftentimes it's sort of like little victories and little setbacks, and you have to just keep kind of pushing and pushing.
How do you balance staying true to your artistic vision while also meeting the demands? But wait, you haven't. I'm sorry. This question should not have been in here. It was the demands of producers or studios.
Yeah, I mean, I think, for emerging screenwriters, it's still something that you have to kind of reckon with. You get notes or feedback about, what would make your script more producible. And you have to decide, I think there's an art to learning how to take notes and figuring out, how to listen and be open to feedback and be willing to make changes, but also, learn what's important for you as an artist to hold on to. So I think even for folks who aren't I think the journey that you have to go through to get to that point hopefully helps you learn how to navigate it once you get there, because in order to get to a place where you're getting notes from producers or directors, there's probably years of getting feedback in order to get to that point and figuring out how to navigate it.
What advice would you give to aspiring screenwriters who are just starting out in the industry?
I think it's really important to develop a community of other writers. And I've done that in a variety of ways. You and I met through Twitter. Twitter has actually been like a really important way that I've made connections with other writers. And I think, being able to trade scripts and give each other support and feedback and help each other make connections is really important. And also just having a sense of community, and that you're not kind of isolated as you're pecking away at your keyboard, right?
Yeah, I mean, where I live, it's pretty isolating as is, because it's like one of the furthest places from Hollywood, and not exactly the most economical place to actually start from.
Okay.
How do you handle feedback and criticism on your work, both constructive and otherwise?
There's a really great podcast called The Screenwriting Life. And it's hosted by two screenwriters who have worked, professionally as screenwriters for a long time. And they do a really great job of sort of humanizing it and normalizing that, the struggles that people face as emerging screenwriters are struggles that professional screenwriters face as well. And one of the things that they talk about in terms of getting notes is it okay if I curse on your podcast?
Yeah, I mean, just
well, okay, I'll do it without being super explicit. They refer to the process of getting notes as F you, F me, what's next? And meaning, a lot of times your first reaction is sort of like, rejecting the note or being mad that you're getting it. And then you tend to move into like, I'm a terrible writer, like I'm getting these notes because I'm never going to, be successful. And then the idea of what's next is, you sort of move through that, the emotion of it, and then you kind of hunker down and figure out, what it is you want to take in from that and what you want to change. So I think it's just about, kind of figuring out that it can be an emotional process because it's our art. And we need to give ourselves some space to, be mad for a day or so, but not just shut down and ignore it and figure out how to, take it in and make our writing better from it.
I mean, depending on who you also get it from, you'll find sometimes the notes, it's like, are you even reading close enough to actually understand what's going on in the script?
For sure.
I've had one person, in my pilot episode clearly tell one character that one species, they called it a human. And it's like, that's not the species that character is. You're not reading it.
Yeah.
What's the most important lesson you've learned about storytelling from your experience as a screenwriter?
I think it has to feel personal on some level, even if I'm telling a story that is in no way about me, like I have to sort of infuse myself somewhere in there so that I feel a connection. And I think that helps create a connection with the reader or the audience. So I think just figuring out how to make it personal on some level is really important.
Are there any specific genres or themes that you are particularly drawn to when writing? You were talking about contemporary, but I know you don't like to do sci-fi, but what genre is your favorite?
I was talking to someone recently, who I had just met, and they asked me what I do, and I said that I was a screenwriter, and they asked me what genre I wrote, and I said comedy, and they said, "Oh, sorry about your childhood." And I think comedy tends to come from having lived through difficult things. So I do tend to write comedy or dramedy. That's where I feel most drawn to. And like I said, it's for me, the way that I'm inspired to write feels very personal. So I play in some different genres. I like horror and horror adjacent things like thrillers. But there's also always a very sort of human story at the root of it, and definitely comedy is kind of my most comfortable space that I like to operate in.
I mean, have you ever tried dark humor in any of your work?
Yes, although not. I think dark can be kind of emotionally dark, or it can be sort of like cynical dark, like satire.
Yeah.
And probably, I probably lean more emotionally dark than satire dark, but yeah.
That screenplay that I sent you, The Customer's Always Right, this is supposed to be a dark comedy, but I don't know how well I pulled it off. I've never really been able to get anyone's true opinion on it.
Well, I'm still in it, so I'm gonna tell you when I when I make it all the way through. Yeah.
Okay. But this is my first attempt at comedy because I honestly am more dramatic in my writings. This was just hey, I saw something on Reddit and thought it was hilarious. What if it had been a movie?
Mm-hmm.
plus
Yeah, I
personal experiences.
definitely, from what I've read so far, I definitely picked up some, the story kind of echoes real life
Hmm.
situations.
That first situation that you see with the cash register actually
Yeah.
happened to me.
Okay. Yeah. I wondered. Yeah. I found myself wondering if you had experienced some of those things yourself. Yeah.
How do you stay inspired to keep your creativity flowing, especially during challenging times?
I like to run. And, uh, the reason I like to run is because, well, I mean, I like to run. And in terms of staying inspired, sometimes it can feel like you're just kind of hunkered at your keyboard and just, getting outside and moving around um, puts me in a different headspace. And a lot of times, like I'll listen to podcasts about screenwriting, and sometimes I'm half listening, and something that they've said has me thinking about my script in a different way than I would have if I was just sort of sitting back at my computer. So I like to just kind of move around and get outside sometimes to shift my perspective.
Can you tell us about any upcoming projects you're working on or projects you're particularly proud of?
Let's see. I am co-writing a thriller with someone, and we're going to find out on Monday. Actually, we're finalists in a competition where if we are one of the winners, they'll help us uh, polish the script. Like there's a
Hmm.
cash prize, and they'll help us work on the script. So that's been really um, it's been fun to learn how to collaborate with another writer. I've never done that before. And it feels good that, we've gotten the recognition of being a finalist. And then I'm just kind of, at this point, I'm just juggling a few different projects and kind of figuring out how I write some new stuff, but also keep working on projects that are in my portfolio and making sure they're really strong.
Co-opting with someone is not easy. I've tried that in the
Mhm.
past. I don't know how people can do it, honestly.
It's really hard, yeah. And I feel lucky that she is someone whose writing I respect, and we're both really good about um, giving each other, sort of like making space for each other. But
Hmm.
it is really hard because it's just so like you put so much of yourself into the writing, and then when someone else is sort of like, I want to do it this way, it can be hard to let go of control or ego, even, so.
What do you think sets great screenplays apart from the rest?
Mm. For me, it's really human connection, really connecting to the characters.
Hmm.
So I can enjoy movies that are in all kinds of different genres. And if the story is interesting and the action is good, like I'll enjoy it. But the movies that I really love, um, the action is great. The horror movie is scary, but like I actually care about the characters that are sort of going through that. So regardless of genre, just like having a sense that there's a real human being that's interesting and, sort of multi-dimensional and not just sort of like a cardboard cutout of someone stuck into a plot-driven situation.
Have you ever tried to create a script that is a particular genre that defies what people understand based on another creator's perception?
Mm.
Like in my case, that pilot you read, okay? A lot of expectation on that one was, oh, Disney did things this way. Why are you doing it this way? Why is
Mhm.
it such? Why is it like this? The screenplay is supposed to be um, very dramatic. It's supposed to be a serious piece, and they're thinking, if this is going to be animation, which is what you're shooting for, why isn't it more family friendly?
Mhm.
It's That's not what I'm going for.
Right.
You know, how would you handle a situation like that?
Yeah, that's tricky. I have actually just started writing an animated short. It's the first time I've tried animation as a screenplay. And when I started writing it, it was pretty lighthearted. It
Hmm.
wasn't, the themes were adult, but it was sort of like what you would imagine visually being a kind of a family animated film. But then the story just sort of evolved in a way that was more serious and a little bit dark and dramatic.
Hmm.
Um, and I haven't figured that out.
Yeah.
I think it's important to write the story that you want to tell, and
Right.
certainly, yeah, like animation. Um, I think people tend to immediately default to family, but like, there's lots of animated movies and shows that are not intended for kids.
Hmm. I mean, but everyone has this expectation. If you're going to have animals, especially animation, you're pretty much either going after DreamWorks or Disney.
Mhm.
You know, but just what you read, it's like it's neither of those, right?
Right, right.
I'm trying to bring a whole new expectation, and everyone's looking at this like, no, we're expecting one of these two things, either one or the other. You can't make your own thing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think it's especially hard when you're outside the industry. Like it's a different story if you're an established animation director who wants to try something different versus someone who, you know, doesn't have a doesn't have an in the industry yet.
Yeah. How do you approach writing dialogue, and do you have any tips for making dialogue feel authentic and compelling?
I would say that dialogue is a strength of mine as a writer, and it's I actually heard a bit of advice recently that was if if it's something that's hard for a writer, they should a thing that they could do is to write a spec script. So pick a TV show that that they love,
Hmm.
Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Friends, a Big Bang Theory, and write an episode because if it's a TV show you love, you've lived with those characters, you have their voices in your head, and so if you write an original episode of the show, like you figure out how to kind of channel them, their humor, and it can be a good exercise to just sort of figure out how to pay attention to someone's voice and then translate it to the page. So I think I think it can be one of those things where if it doesn't come naturally, it's all craft. You can learn
Yeah.
all of it. It's just a matter of figuring out how you tune into that and translate it.
Let's see. I don't know if dialogue is my biggest issue. Off of writing novels, you kind of understand the characters, their how they would speak and everything. It's just translating that prospect across mediums that becomes
Yeah,
hard, because you can write the dialogue any different way, but it's how it's perceived. There's more to the dialogue than just dialogue, and people don't realize that on the script.
yeah, 100%. And then of course there's the idea that you should be able to tell um, who a character is, based on the way that they're talking without knowing, without even seeing their name. So you have to sort of distinguish each voice. It's a lot. Yeah, it's a lot to kind of juggle.
Finally, if you could collaborate with any director, actor, or producer, living or deceased, who would it be and why?
That's a fun question. I would have to really think about that to come up with a great answer. But the one that sort of jumps to mind for me is Melissa McCarthy, because I think that she's really talented at doing both drama and humor, and sometimes in the same project. I don't think she's always in the best projects. Like, not every Melissa McCarthy movie might be the best movie. But when she really is in the right vehicle and given the chance to do what she does best, I think it's pretty magical. And I think there's a matchup for me in terms of sort of humor and pathos that I feel like she kind of embodies. So it just would be really fun to be able to work with someone like her.
And see, I was just imagining someone like Tim Burton.
Mm-hmm.
Because he can pull off almost similar. It's just a little, I guess, darker
Yeah.
in tone.
Is that who it would be for you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, nice.
I would love to see him work on one of my projects. Excuse me.
Nice.
And that brings us to the end of this fascinating episode of LPA Presents. I hope you've enjoyed our deep dive into the world of screenwriting with the incredibly talented Michael Buonocore. His insights and stories are truly inspiring. Here on LPA Presents, we have the privilege of interviewing a diverse range of professionals from across the entertainment industry, from screenwriters and directors to actors, authors, and even fellow podcasters. Our goal is to bring you the voices and experiences of those who shape the stories we love. Our mission is to inspire a new generation of creators. We hope that by sharing these journeys, challenges, and triumphs, you'll find the motivation and knowledge to pursue your own creative dreams. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you've enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Let us know who you'd like to see on the show next. And remember, the world of entertainment is vast and full of opportunities. Go out there and create something amazing. And for those who've made it this far, I'd also like to let you know one of the things I was mentioning earlier is my new book, Virtual Requiem, is out if you'd like to pick it up. It's on Amazon. But I'm Matthew D. Rhodes, and this is LP Presents. Until next time, keep dreaming, keep creating, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible.